Chapter 2481. Nalace smiled. Thanks for the concern. They're all fine. How are you doing, Uncle Brandon? Brandon nodded and picked up his teacup. I'm doing just fine. Colton walked down the stairs and saw Nalace. Someone really knows when to come to pay a visit in order to grab a free meal. At that moment, Daisy poked her head out of the kitchen. Don't you dare bully my husband. Colton was rendered speechless. Brandon laughed and changed the subject. Do you guys want to have roast turkey tonight? Daisy answered immediately. Roast turkey sounds great. Nalace said, I'll go with my wife's choice. Just as Brandon was about to speak, Colton was the only one who seemed bothered by the idea. Roast turkey, I'll skip. Freya cleared her throat. He pretended to hesitate for a short while and turned his face away. Okay, we'll go with roast turkey. Daisy's smile intensified. At 5 p.m., the table was full of food. There was roast turkey, mashed potatoes, maple glazed ham, green bean casserole, gravy, cranberry sauce, and so on, and for dessert, sticky toffee pudding. Nalace was mixing the sauces while Colton was serving the dishes, and Brandon was fetching the silverware from the kitchen to the dining table. After everyone was seated, Brandon felt touched as he witnessed the jolly and cozy scene, as it had not been this boisterous for a long time. Let's eat. Everyone picked up their silverware and started eating. Because Daisy was pregnant, she had been craving spicy and sour food recently, so Nalace added some lemon juice to her sauce. Seeing this, Freya asked with a smile, I heard that women who have an appetite for spicy food while they're pregnant means that they're pregnant with twins, so does that mean that we'll be expecting twins from you, Daisy? Colton was deboning the turkey for Freya when his eyelids twitched. The chance of her being blessed with twins isn't 100%. Daisy raised her head. Colton, are you looking down on me? He glanced across the dining table at Nalace. The one that he looked down upon was obviously Nalace. Nalace raised his eyebrows slightly. Why are you dragging me down with you just because you can't do that? Colton's expression dimmed. Just who do you think you're referring to? Brandon watched the bickering from the sidelines and was worried that they might get into a quarrel, so he wanted to interrupt them but failed to even find a gap to do so. On the other side of the table, Freya and Daisy had long gotten used to it, as Colton and Nalace were known to have disliked each other long ago. Daisy picked up her drink. Merry Christmas, guys. I guess a toast should follow. Brandon and Freya picked up their glasses, responding to Daisy's suggestion, and under Daisy and Freya's watchful gazes, the two reluctantly picked up their wine glasses. Daisy grabbed Colton and Nalace's wrists and clinked their wine glasses against each other. We should harmoniously stay together as a family in the future. I've always believed that all grievances can be resolved through a good meal. If one isn't enough, then make it two. Fortunately, the atmosphere became harmonious in the end. As night fell, the streets still looked extremely lively. Children were playing in the snow to welcome Christmas, and the surroundings were filled with laughter. Daisy and Nalace did not go back home. Instead, they went on a stroll on a bridge, holding hands. While they were doing so, the wind blew and messed up Daisy's hair. Nalace, I haven't given you your Christmas present yet, have I? Nalace turned his head and stared at her with a hint of affection flashing across his eyes. You being by my side is already the best gift I could ever hope for. She looked up at him, and her smile looked as brilliant as the sun. Then I'll be with you for the rest of our lives. He held the back of her head and kissed her forehead. Okay. There's a taco truck on the side of the road. Daisy hurried forward. Nalace followed her helplessly. Don't run, slowly. Standing in front of the food truck that was selling tacos, Daisy rubbed her hands and blew her warm breath at them. The old lady working at the truck handed Daisy a taco, and she took it from her, eagerly peeled it, and took a bite of the warm taco. Nalace took out his wallet and paid for the taco. Do you want to have a bite? Daisy held the taco and shoved it up to his face. Chapter 2482. Nalace wrapped his arms around Daisy's shoulder and gnawed the taco exactly where she had bitten it. Of course. And it tastes very sweet. Just like you. Daisy's cheeks warmed up. I only asked you to grab a taste of the taco, and you're giving me nonsense. His smile widened. We just had a full meal at Colton's, and you're already eating a taco. Your son is the one who's hungry, not me. Then our son has quite a huge appetite. He'll probably be a chubby boy in the future. Daisy covered her abdomen with her palm and laughed. Why must it be a chubby boy? It might be a chubby girl. Nalles lifted her hair with his fingertips, saw her slightly gluttonous look, and could not help but laugh out loud. It doesn't matter. I like both genders. At this time, Daisy's cell phone rang. She took it out and looked at the caller ID. It was Diana. Mom, Diana said with a smile, Daisy, your dad and I will stay in the palace tonight, and we won't return home, so please pass this message to Nalles for me. By the way, do remember to tell me if that kid dares to bully you. Nalles leaned over closer to the cell phone, heard the sentence, and grabbed the cell phone. Okay, Mom, if you want to go on a date with Dad, just go. Don't disturb us. Upon hearing Nalles's voice, Diana snorted. If you dare to bully Daisy while we're away, the only thing waiting for you when I get back will be an ass whooping. Daisy squinted, chuckled, and said next to the phone, Don't worry, Mom. Nalles won't bully me. Nalles hung up the phone and hugged Daisy in his arms. My parents aren't in. No one will be there to bother us tonight. She whispered, all you think about all day are such filthy things. Nalles lowered his head and pecked her on the cheek. Who told you to take me in and become my wife? 1 month later, Daisy's stomach started to bloat slightly. Although it was not obvious, she seemed to be able to feel the little fella in her womb now. Coupled with Diana's meticulous care, she was well fed, had gained a significant amount of weight, and had become more voluptuous looking. Daisy had not been posting any updates on Twitter for a month, and the first post she uploaded was a photo of her and Diana, which made many netizens envious. #holy shit. Daisy's mother-in-law looks stunning. No wonder Daisy's husband looks so good. It seems that he's inherited it from his mother. Dada is indeed the family's favorite too. The world owes me such a good mother-in-law. Diana was overjoyed to see Daisy's fans praising her for her young and gorgeous appearance. It seems that I didn't hold you back in the photo. Daisy laughed. No worries, Mom. You look just as good as my mom. Oh really? Speaking of which, I still haven't met your mother after all this while. I really want to. Diana could not wait to meet her in-laws. Rick, who was sitting across from Diana drinking his tea, closed the newspaper in his hands. By the way, didn't Father say that he wants to meet these two kids? Let's bring them into the palace this week. Diana recalled it all of a sudden. Yeah, I totally forgot about that. After saying that, she covered the back of Daisy's hand. You should come to the palace together with Nalles this week. Nalles's grandfather hasn't been at the peak of his health in recent years, and he's always wanted to meet you. Daisy was startled for a split second but did not refuse. Okay. The next day, Daisy and Nalles went into the palace. King William waited in his chamber, and after the announcement of their arrival and getting King William's permission, the two stepped into the chamber. King William sat on his bed, and because of his illness, he looked very haggard and pale. Nolachi led Daisy to the bedside. Grandfather. He nodded and ordered the servants to bring chairs for them. I haven't seen you for such a long time, Nolachi. Who would think that you'd become a father in the blink of an eye? Chapter 2483. Nalles stared at King William. How are you feeling? He smiled and explained, it's fine. Everyone falls sick when they get old. I've given all my life to the politics of this country, and I've devoted myself to state affairs. I've never neglected my people, but with that, I've definitely ignored you guys back at home. Nalles pursed his lips and did not utter a single word. King William looked outside the window, and his gaze dimmed. I wronged your grandmother back then, your mother, you, and let's not forget about Freya. He was also very saddened by what Freya's mother had done. After all, she was also his daughter. And Freya had always been innocent. Daisy's eyebrows twitched. Grandpa, you have to take good care of your health. You'll still have the chance to make up for the things that you just mentioned in the future, and I'm confident that Freya won't blame you. Hearing what Daisy said, King William smiled. I hope so too. He then started coughing all of a sudden, and Nalais became nervous instantly. "Grandfather." King William waved his hands, soothed his breath, and said, "I know my condition very well. That's why there's one thing that I hope you can promise me." Nalais lowered his gaze. "Do tell." King William took out 2 documents, 2 sets of wills to be precise, from the bedside table drawer. One belonged to Nalais, while the other belonged to Freya. Nalais's pupils constricted instantly. "Grandfather, death is an inevitable event in life. Everyone will have to face it someday. It's just that I'm not sure how much longer I will have, so I must make preparations before that day comes." King William handed the 2 wills to Nalais. "I know you're not very interested in inheriting the throne, so I won't force you to do so. The wills will go into effect as soon as I die, and the royal family will fall into your mother's hand from then onward. I believe that she'll become an excellent queen, and with your father's assistance, there's nothing for me to worry about." He covered the back of Nalais's hand. "So, promise me." Nalais's expression looked tense. He knew that if he did not agree, his grandfather would definitely not be able to be at ease. Thus, he took a deep breath after a long time and gave him a promise. "Okay, grandfather, you have my word." King William gave off a faint smile. The 2 then left the palace. On their way back, Nalais's expression looked extremely anguished. Daisy held his hand, silently accompanying him the whole time. Nalais took her into his arms. "Thank you, Daisy." He thanked her for staying with him. Daisy patted him on the back and coaxed him. "I'm your wife. There's no need for you to be so polite to me. Besides, I'll still be with you no matter what happens." He buried his face in her shoulders and hugged her tightly. Unsurprisingly, it was not long before the news of King William's death caused a sensation worldwide. Yaramoor's flag was flown at half-mast outside the palace, and many citizens who were close to the royal family went to mourn outside the palace gate. Upon hearing the news of their father's death, Diana and Rick rushed to the palace early to organize King William's funeral. The media captured some photos of Diana. Her eyes looked bloodshot and slightly swollen. Diana was King William's only daughter, and now that King William had passed away, she had attracted the most media attention out of anyone in the country. After all, she was about to become the queen of the royal family. On the other side of the country, at the film college. "Have you heard that King William passed away this morning?" King William seldom attended parliamentary meetings and events since half a year ago. His health probably had been deteriorating since then. Freya's pen fell to the ground when she heard these words. She got out of her seat abruptly and ran out. Because Leia was worried about her, she got up and went after her. Freya stopped underneath the classrooms and cried out loud as sadness overwhelmed her. Chapter 2484. Leia walked to her side. "Freya, are you okay?" She shook her head and could not even utter a word at that moment. Leia stayed by her side and comforted her until Colton appeared. He knew that Freya would hear the news, so he rushed to the college to find her. Colton brought Freya to his side. "Thanks, Leia. Sorry to have bothered you. You can leave her to me now." Leia nodded. Colton got into the car with Freya in his arms, and the car then left the college. He brought Freya to the palace, and just as Freya was puzzled, Nalais and Daisy walked out of the huge building. "Freya, you should also go see Grandpa for the last time." Freya clenched the hands that were hanging by her sides and quickly stepped indoors. The people who came to mourn were all dignitaries and politicians in the main hall. King William's body was placed in a glass coffin, and his expression looked peaceful, as if he was asleep. Freya appeared in the hall, followed by Nalais. She walked to the glass coffin step by step. Although she was not very close to her so-called grandfather, she still felt a faint torment deep down when she thought that the person lying there was her biological grandfather. After the memorial service was over, Nalais handed over a stack of documents to her. "This is what grandfather left for you." Freya was slightly startled, and after a long pause, she took it from him. "But why?" "Because you're his granddaughter as well." Freya bit her lips tightly, squeezed the documents in her hands, and crumpled them. Nalais did not say a word, turned around, and walked out of the corridor. She stood alone in the empty corridor, mottled by the lights, and her lonesome shadow was cast on the glass window. In fact, even if King William did not remember having a granddaughter, she would not feel too bad. However, when Knollys handed her the will and told her that she was King William's granddaughter too, only then did she understand that her grandfather had never forgotten about her. Freya lowered her head as if something was crushed in her chest cavity and then held the documents tightly in her arms and against her chest. She even had to hold back her voice as she cried. Colton stood behind her. After a long time, he approached her step by step, raised his hands, and grabbed her by her shoulders. She was startled, turned around, and stared at Colton with tears still rolling down her cheeks. Colton took her into his arms. She lowered her gaze and buried her face into his shoulder. He wrapped his arms around her trembling shoulders and said in a low voice, "Cry out loud if you feel like doing so. No one will laugh at you." Freya hugged him tightly and soaked his shoulders with tears. After leaving the palace, Freya did not speak since she got in the car. She leaned against the car window, and her eyes fell outside the window. The streets and alleys all looked deserted, but she still saw pedestrians holding their king's portraits, mourning him on the streets. Colton took a glance at her through the rearview mirror. "You can cry all you want now, but look at you. Please, don't make Dad think that I bullied you before that when we get home. I won't be able to explain myself if that happens." Freya wiped the tears on the corners of her eyes away. "Dad probably saw the news too. He'll understand. I'm worried that if you go back with this crybaby of a face, your dad will cry with you when he sees it later." Colton pretended to sigh. "You can cry all you want, and I can always coax you. But if Dad is the one who cries, I don't want to coax a man." She stopped crying and chuckled. "Since when did I ask you to coax me?" Her gaze continued to be fixed on the scenery outside the window. "Actually, it's just very regretful that I didn't even get to see my grandfather one last time." Colton frowned slightly and replied calmly, "There are always regrets in life. And no one could predict when King William would pass away. You claimed that you failed to see him one last time before he passed away. So why didn't he summon you into the palace during his final moments? Is it because he had forgotten about your existence?" Chapter 2485. I don't think so. Maybe he knew that his life was already coming to an end, and he didn't want to burden someone else with more sadness. Even if you got to see him on his deathbed, you wouldn't be able to change anything. All you would get from that was sorrow, and you might not even be able to accept the situation. If he were to see you with this melancholic expression, he'd feel even guiltier and uneasier. Freya lowered her gaze and said nothing. After a long time, she forced a smile. "Thank you for comforting me." At the villa, Brandon saw them coming in, got up slowly, and saw Freya's bloodshot eyes. "Even I know about King William's death. She must have known about it too." Dad, don't worry, I'm fine." After saying that, she turned around and went upstairs. Brandon watched with a worried expression as she went upstairs, and Colton turned to look at him. She went to the memorial service. Let's just say that she was able to send her grandfather off. Brandon regained his composure and nodded. "Thank you for staying by her side." Freya returned to the room, sat on her bed, stared at the will in her hand, and hesitated for a long time before opening it. A letter fell out of the envelope at that moment. The letterhead was reserved for the royal family, and Freya's name was written on the recipient column. She was stunned for a split second and quickly tore the letter's envelope open. The content of the letter was as followed. "Freya, I know what your mother has done, and I'm sorry for letting you grow up in an environment where a mother's love was nowhere to be found. As the king of this country, I'm indebted to your grandmother, and I've not educated your mother well, and I even caused you not to have a complete family. I didn't take your mother and brother in because their thirst for power had already consumed them. This was also the biggest failure of my life. However, throughout all the chaos, you've always been the innocent one. When I learned that she actually had a daughter, I couldn't bear to know that you were being maltreated. That's why I announced your identity to the public back then, but I didn't expect that my action didn't change your mother's attitude toward you. Freya, you're a kind girl. Although I can't do anything for you when I'm alive, I hope I can leave you something after my departure from the world. I'll do my best to make up for you." I hope you don't refuse this little thought of mine. After seeing the closing of the letter and the signature that William had left at the lower right corner, Freya covered her mouth, and tears gushed down her cheeks again, smearing the ink on the letter. Colton stood outside the door. He originally wanted to knock on the door, but when he heard the sobbing that was coming from inside, he stopped, turned around, and left without saying anything. On the third day of the king's death, Diana and her husband were totally occupied by the country's political affairs, and the coronation ceremony would take place in another week. The media were scrambling around the capital city for news surrounding the royal family. King William's eldest daughter, Princess Diana, was about to inherit the throne, and Rick would become the official consort of the country. When domestic netizens heard the news, many people envied Daisy even more. The Goldmans' in-laws had risen to the center of the royal family, and the man who married the daughter of the Goldmans was now a legitimate prince. Hashtag fairy tales really don't lie. The princess will always get married to a prince. Hashtag Dada must have saved the universe in her previous life to be blessed with such a life encounter, right? Won't that make Dada the princess of Yaramore now? Ha ha ha, she's reached the pinnacle of her life. When Zephyr saw this news article, he flung the newspaper onto the desk. Before he got to know Nolachi's identity, he did not think he was inferior to him in any way. But now, he seemed unable to deny what Colton had said to him back then. If I want to marry Daisy, my family status and background have to outmatch the Goldmans one way or another. Now that Nolachi has become a prince, how can the Goslings compete with the royal family of a country? A princess will always choose to marry a prince, while a knight can only accept that he'll always be a knight. Chapter 2486. There was a knock on the door, and Zephyr looked through his fingers. Come in. Leah opened the door and walked in, and he was slightly startled by her appearance. Why are you here? Leah lifted the bag she was carrying, which contained snacks and beer. Seeing that you've been staying home, recuperating for so long, I was afraid that you'd be bored, so I came to visit you. She put the beer on the table and took out some snacks. At this time, you definitely need a drink, don't you? Zephyr gave off a faint sneer. You've read the news. As long as one isn't blind, they will surely see it. She opened a can of beer and handed it to him. Zephyr took it from her and took a sip. Leah sat across from him. Your injury should almost be healed, shouldn't it? He responded with a casual hum. Leah lifted her head and stared at him for a long time. It's not that I want to nag you, but I really think it's time for you to leave your feelings for Daisy behind. After all, she's already married, and you can't do anything to change it. So what? Zephyr's gaze shifted away from her. Are you here to persuade me to give up on her? Then what do you plan to do if you don't want to give up? Do you think you still have a chance? Leah's expression looked very solemn. Zephyr, we grew up together. I don't want to see you go astray because of that persistence of yours, or should I say stubbornness. It's not worth it. He did not utter a single word. Leah lowered her gaze and looked at the cider in her hand. I understand that you won't listen to what I have to say. I won't even bother to care about you if you're not a friend. Then why do you care? Because we're friends. Zephyr looked at her. Leah pursed her lips, looked away, and changed the subject. You've recovered from the injury. Aunt Patricia won't let you pursue your career as a director now, so what do you plan to do now? Zephyr stroked the beer can in his hand. I don't know. He really did not know what to do. In other words, he actually did not know if he still wanted to stick to this line of work. In the beginning, he chose to enter the industry only because of Daisy, but he no longer knew now. Leah took a deep breath. She totally understood his hesitation. Actually, all you need to do is follow the voice in your heart. Is it really the career that you want to pursue most? You don't make a choice because of someone else. Choose for yourself and yourself only. Zephyr continued to drink without saying anything. Leah left the Goslings' residence at noon and met Patricia in the courtyard. Seeing Leah, Patricia gave off a faint smile. Leah, have you come to visit Zephyr? Leah nodded. Yes, Aunt Patricia. Patricia walked up to Leah and grabbed her hand. Leah, please help me persuade Zephyr. You two have grown up together since you were little kids, and the friendship that you two share is the closest I've ever seen, so I trust you." Leah was a little embarrassed. "Aunt, I've tried to persuade him multiple times, but at the end of the day, whether he'll listen to me or not completely lies in his own hands." Patricia chuckled all of a sudden. "How good would it be if you were my daughter-in-law?" Leah was flustered. Aunt Patricia, what are you talking about? I can tell that you actually have a thing for Zephyr, don't you?" Patricia caressed her cheek. "The relationship between our families has been rather close since you two were kids. If you can marry Zephyr, I believe both Uncle Alexander and I, and even your parents will be more than willing to see that." Leah's eyelids twitched. "I've always concealed this secret so deeply that no one else would realize it, yet Aunt Patricia has managed to see through it." But she thought of something and lowered her gaze. "Aunt Patricia, he doesn't have a thing for me. Such forced relationships won't end well. They're usually fruitless." "Why not? Feelings can be cultured and groomed as time passes, not to mention that you two have such a close relationship." Patricia smiled. "Zephyr doesn't have a girlfriend now, and I've always been worried that he'll give up on life and degenerate because of Daisy, so I can only count on you now." Chapter 2487. Leah did not say anything, but millions of thoughts were flashing across her mind. On the other side of things, Nalles drove to the Blue Valley Manor, and Daisy got out of the car. Looking at the magnificent and classical-looking manor, Daisy was a little shocked. "Could this be one of the things that Grandpa left for you?" Nalles nodded. "This manor is where my grandmother used to live way back then. After she passed away, the property's ownership went to my grandfather. He was very reluctant about auctioning it, so it's been vacant all these years." After explaining some of the backstories of the manor to Daisy, he stretched his hand out toward her. "Let's take a walk around the manor." Daisy grabbed his hand with a grin and walked with him into the huge garden. This manor was located very near the Imperial Palace. One could see the clock tower in the palace, and it was located in the most prosperous city center. The garden had a few man-made pools and bridges, and there were even several pavilions. The snow on the fountains, sculptures, stone paths, and rose bushes was glimmering under the warm winter sun. The snow that covered evergreens and eaves started melting and dripping into the pool, stirring up ripples. Daisy grinned. "It's so quiet and peaceful here." Nalles smiled too. "It's indeed very peaceful, very suitable for a spiritual stay." After that, he stopped and turned to look at Daisy. "When the baby is born, we'll move here with the baby. Our kids can run around in the garden and play around the manor. It'll surely be very boisterous." Daisy looked at him. "Aren't you afraid of them getting lost in such a huge place?" He sneered. "So it's best for them not to inherit your clumsiness." "Who are you referring to as a clumsy person?" Daisy crossed her arms and turned her face away. "I'm not as bad as you think I am when it comes to telling directions." Nalles's smile intensified. "Nalles, can you tell me more about your grandma? Do you want to know about her?" She nodded. Nalles brought her to one of the pavilions, sat down, and began to talk about his grandmother. "I don't have a very clear memory of my grandmother, but I heard from my mother that I once lived here with her when I was very young. My mother told me that my grandmother was a gentle and virtuous woman. Even though my grandfather had a mistress, my grandmother accepted the mistress's existence magnanimously. She never had any prejudice against my aunt because she was the mistress child. She only fell out with my grandfather when I got kidnapped. Nalles had been brought back to the Knolls when he was 3 or 4 years old, and that was how he had become Madame Knoll's target. Daisy had also heard about Nalles's kidnapping when he was a boy. Then the incident must have been terrifying to you, right?" It was indeed terrifying. His eyes turned gloomy, but instead of being overwhelmed by horror, unwillingness was the main emotion that haunted me during those days. I couldn't accept that I was being persecuted by my own fate, my identity, so the only thing I thought about back then was to survive. After saying that, he turned his head and stared at Daisy. I pretended to be well-behaved, pretended to be scared, and didn't dare to resist them. That's why they didn't kill me directly but wanted to traffic me instead when they kidnapped me. That was when I knew my life wouldn't be threatened, at least temporarily. They thought that I, a child, wouldn't be capable of escaping their captivity. That's why they let their guard down against me. Nales stared at the compound. I took advantage of their lack of vigilance and added rodenticide to their food. Daisy was taken aback. Nales looked at her. Am I a total scum? I already killed someone with poison at a young age. Does it scare you? Daisy frowned, walked up to him, and shook her head. I'm not afraid of you. Besides, you were only protecting yourself. Chapter 2488. Nales reached out and pulled Daisy into his arms. Are you really not afraid of me? She leaned into his arms. It's not that you've hurt me before. He rested his chin on top of her fluffy hair and sneered. You're a silly girl who will risk herself to go on an adventure with me. How can I ever make up my mind to lay a finger on you? Daisy, there's a question that I wish to know the answer to. When they kidnapped and brought me to Octavia, and you went with me, weren't you afraid back then? Daisy looked up at him and let off a wide and brilliant grin. Nope, because I knew my dad would definitely come to save us, and you would protect me too. He paused for a split second and then looked down at her. Did I protect you? It was obvious that you were the one who was protecting me. Daisy explained with a smile, actually, I don't know why I took that risk with you, but the one thing that I know is that I have no regrets. Nales hugged her tightly and pressed his lips against her forehead. I think you're the only person in this world who can be this dumb. Okay, Nales, let's not talk about the past first. Daisy got out of his arms, took his hand, and led him out of the pavilion. I haven't seen the manor's interior, so you have to bring me inside for a tour. Nales, who was walking behind her, chuckled. All right, I'll be your tour guide for the day. After leaving the Blue Valley Manor, Nales sent Daisy back to the Knowles mansion and went to his company. The elevator arrived at the administration department. Just as he stepped out of the elevator, a party popper was set off, and ribbons were shot into the air and scattered all over the place. Gideon, who took the lead in organizing a small party, congratulated him. Congratulations, bro. Oh, my bad. I should address you as Prince Nales now. Nales frowned and brushed off all the ribbons that landed on his body. Are you exhilarated about this? Of course. The owner of Giannis Group is now the royal prince, and he's also my godbrother. Gideon walked up to him and wrapped his arm around his shoulder. If my family learns I know the Prince of Yaramore, I can imagine how thrilled they will be. We work for the prince. How can we not feel happy about this? Everyone else followed suit. Nales grabbed Gideon by the back of his collar and dragged him into his office. In the office, Nales walked to the couch and sat down. Gideon walked up to him with a hippie smirk and sat down too. Bro, I have some good news for you. Nales responded with a faint hum, picked up the teapot, and poured himself a cup of tea. Shoot, aren't we recruiting people recently? The applicants we got yesterday are all elites in the field, and they all came here with ambitions and the technologies they hold. Is this good news? Of course, there are also 10 tech companies vying to get into collaborations with us. We don't even need to recruit personnel now. We can hold an interview and choose from the sea of candidates. Giannis Tech was established 2 years ago, and Gideon understood the company's hardships in these 2 years. There was never a shortage of funds, but there had always been a shortage of manpower, especially in the technical departments. Other companies hired many elites for high salaries, and although Giannis Tech's salary was not low, it was still a newly established company back then. The elites in the field would naturally choose to work under more well-established companies. Especially when Nales was not in the company, many technicians left because they had been overworked, and very few people chose to stay. When the internal was unstable, it would be difficult for Giannis Tech to expand. And now, with many tech elites choosing Giannis Tech as the company they wanted to work for and various companies successively extending olive branches in the company's direction, this was indeed good news for Gideon. Nolachi drank the tea unhurriedly. Do you really think that the companies are sincere with their collaboration proposal? The Knowles have become the royal family, and the benefits they can extort from the company are now unbelievably huge. Who wouldn't want to form some sort of connection with the royal family? Chapter 2489. Giannis Tech is a company that I founded rather recently. Once we get the royal family's support, the company won't even need to actively look for business partners at all. Countless partners will definitely take the initiative to come to us, proposing collaborations in all aspects. Gideon was puzzled. Then, Nales put his teacup down. We're not in a hurry to find a business partner right now. What we need now is technical personnel. As for the companies that want to work with us, just come up with some excuses and decline their proposals. Gideon was stunned for a moment, but he could only nod at the end of the day. Okay. At the same time, all news channels, newspapers, and magazines were still reporting Diana's preparation for the coronation. The students of the film college had all been talking about the royal family recently. At that moment, Freya passed by in the corridor, and several students glanced at her as they whispered to each other. If I'm not mistaken, she seems to be related to the royal family. I heard that King William had prepared 2 wills before his death, and one is probably hers. Her grandmother was only King William's mistress back then, so the power of the royal family has nothing to do with her. So, why would the king leave her anything? Yeah, the heir of the Knowles is now the prince, and Mrs. Knowles is the only person who's a legitimate descendant of King William's bloodline. She'll be crowned as the queen in 3 days. So, as someone from the Pruitts, she shouldn't have much to do with the royal family now. Freya was just about to go upstairs when she heard Leia calling her. She then turned her head around and saw Leia. Leia walked toward her. I heard that you've applied for a leave of absence. Are you okay? Freya shook her head. I'm fine. Leia wrapped her arm around her and went upstairs with her. There's no need to care about the rumors that have been spreading around campus these few days. That's just so them. They just can't stop gossiping about others behind their backs. Freya gave off a smile. I don't care about them. It was not that she had not been in such situations. However, don't you feel bad for yourself? Leia asked all of a sudden. Freya was startled. Bad. Although your mother is just the daughter of a mistress, you're still King William's granddaughter. Even if the succession of the throne has nothing to do with you, the king should at least give you something to make up for it, right? In the eyes of the others, Freya was in an awkward position now. She was related to the royal family, but her blood was not pure, as she was the descendant of the king's mistress. Nales was now the prince of Yaramore, his mother was going to inherit the throne, and his father would become the consort. As for Freya, she was at most a close relative of the royal family and had not received a reward, not even a penny. Freya laughed out loud. Do you really believe in those rumors? It's not that I believe them. It's just that the rumors are spreading like wildfire now. If they're true, it's not fair to you. Freya stopped, turned around, and looked at Leia. It doesn't matter to me whether my grandfather has left me something or not because I've never admitted that I'm related to the royal family either. I know that my grandmother was a mistress. She was just a lover who couldn't even be talked about. Although I don't have the ambition that my mother had, I don't want to be in power, and I don't want to have anything to do with the royal family. I know very well that what I want has nothing to do with status and power. If what I wanted were status and power, I could have relied on my grandfather's guilt toward me and used it to ask for heaps of benefits. I could enjoy all the benefits with peace of mind without caring about the criticism coming from the world. But I don't want to do so. Because even if I get my hands on something that doesn't belong to me, it won't be justifiable. Leia laughed. Freya, you're truly the most determined person I've ever met. After all, not everyone can remain cool when the temptation is that big. Shannon is a great example. Chapter 2490. There were too few people who would say no to wealth and power. At that moment, Shannon was standing not far away. Seeing that Leia and Freya were getting closer by the day, she felt irked. Leia had always been obedient to her before this. She always thought that no matter what she did, Leia would never cut off her connection with herself. It's all because of that bitch. Freya Pruitt, just wait. I'll personally give you hell when the time comes. At noon, when Freya was leaving the college, Shannon suddenly stopped her and caught up to her very anxiously. Freya, something happened to Leia. Freya frowned. What happened? She gasped for air and elaborated. I was looking for her just now, but I saw her being harassed by several men in the parking lot. Although Freya had doubts, Leia's safety was at stake, so she went with Shannon. However, the parking lot was empty. As soon as Freya turned around, her eyes got sprayed with a can of aerosol. She took 2 steps backward instantly, and 2 men appeared out of nowhere from behind her, covered her mouth, and knocked her out. Seeing Freya being taken into a van, Shannon threw the aerosol can into the garbage bin with a smirk on her face. When Colton returned to the villa, Brandon saw that he was alone and asked, "Didn't Faye come home with you?" Colton frowned. "She hasn't come back." "No, normally, she should have come back at this point. Could it be that she's gone out with her coursemates?" Colton did not say anything, took out his cell phone, and called Freya, but her cell phone had been turned off. Based on what he knew about her, she would never turn off her phone. Thinking of this, Colton felt uneasy. He then turned around and left immediately. He drove to the college and just so happened to run into Leia. He got out of the car and stopped her. Leia was astonished for a moment but then walked toward him. "Mr. Goldman, where's Freya?" "Freya left the college at noon." "What's wrong? Did something happen?" Seeing that his expression looked extremely distressed, Leia started to feel that something was wrong too. Colton calmed himself down and asked, "Where's the college's surveillance or security room?" Leia brought Colton to the surveillance room. Originally, the security guards did not allow them to go through the footage, but as soon as Leia told them that a coursemate of hers had disappeared from campus, the guards were worried that something might have happened, so they looked into the footage. The surveillance showed that Freya had indeed left the college, but after a while, a woman led Freya away from the campus gate. Although the footage only captured the woman's back, Leia recognized it at first glance and covered her mouth in shock. Shannon. At the same time, Freya woke up, found herself tied to a bed, and took a good look around the room. It looked like one of the bedrooms of a villa, and there was a video camera being clamped at the end of the bed. The door was pushed open at that moment, and Shannon walked in with her boyfriend and 2 other men. Shannon wrapped her arm around her boyfriend's. "Why wake up so soon? The climax of the show hasn't even started yet." Freya's expression dimmed in an instant. "You lied to me. It actually took you so long to realize that I lied to you. How can you be so dumb that you would believe that something had happened to Leia?" A hint of undisguised disgust beamed from the bottom of Shannon's eyes. "Freya Pruitt, you're the exact reason Leia severed her friendship with me and why our coursemates alienated me. If your so-called husband didn't show up that day, no one would have spoiled the fun that they were having." Only then did Freya notice that the 2 men who came in with the couple were the 2 men who had harassed her coursemates at the party. Shannon's boyfriend hugged her. "Sweetheart, so what do you plan to do to her?" Shannon snuggled into his arms. "She deliberately disrupted the party and upset your friends that day. So why not give her a chance to make up for it? Your friends can do whatever they want."